We are talking leadership, and we're looking at in this lecture here what leadership is in general. We're also going to look at some leadership styles and this idea of advocacy as well. All right, so first question that I've got for you. Are people born to be leaders, or is that something that we learn over time, or is it some kind of mix, right? Some people say that there are born leaders out there. What does it take to be a leader, in your opinion, and based on maybe your previous experiences as a leader or as a person that has had to follow others that did a good or bad job? Like, what makes a person a good leader? And then keep that in your back pocket as well. This idea about people being born to be leaders, is that some kind of trait that we're born with? Some people would say yes. So, when we talk about some qualities of an effective leader, we're going to break these down into there's five different things that we're going to look at here. And the first is flexibility, right? Knowing when you need to be flexible really helps streamline processes and really encourages members to grow and to learn new skills and everything like that. So, that flexibility, that's a huge part of being a good leader. You also need to have empathy, right? Practicing empathy can help you to better understand the people around you. You can build trust, you can develop relationships, right? Empathy really goes a long way to be able to show that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to feel bad for them, but you need to know how they feel. And we've got decisiveness, right? When you decide, it's helpful to be logical, to be thoughtful, but also to be as quick with your decision as possible to where you can still make a good, solid decision. You don't want to wait around forever to make your decision. You want to be decisive, and you want to be able to, decide which direction to go as soon as possible. And then the last one, be communicative, right? Effective communication, it can help reduce conflict. It can increase productivity, and it's really a big deal in all of this. You need to be able to take all four of these elements here, be flexible, but communicate, and that empathy, all of these things, that decisiveness, these are all things that you want to utilize together. I want to look a little bit more at this idea of communication. So, a little bit more on that, right? When we talk about the kind of communication that a good leader does, the first thing is they want to be able to communicate without dominating the conversation, right? We want to communicate with the group. We don't want to dominate it, though. We want to leave them available to speak and do the things that they need to do. We want to communicate a clear grasp of the task at hand. How many of you have had leaders that just they can't seem to really communicate to you what the expectations are, what needs to get done? You got to be able to communicate the tasks to your subordinates so they can do what they need to do to get the job done. Facilitate discussion, right? You don't want to force them to do things. You want to facilitate. You want to be there to be open, to get the flow going, to have subordinates talking among themselves, talking with you, you talking with them, right? It needs to be an open kind of form of dialogue. And then the last one, you want to encourage instead of forcing dialogue. It needs to be organic. It needs to be natural. If you're a good leader, you know how to naturally have these kind of interactions with your subordinates. Okay, so before we get into defining what leadership is itself, I want to talk about something that absolutely cannot be separated from leadership and the idea of leadership, and that's power, right? Power is a huge part of leadership. That's how we utilize the resources we have to make things happen, is through our use of power. That's what leaders do. So, if we define what power is, it's a leader's ability to influence, guide, and control the actions of others to achieve a specific goal, right? So, my power is my ability to get you to do the things that I need you to do so that we can achieve the goals that we need to achieve, right? That's what power is. So, I want to look at some different types of power, because really understanding power is really crucial for effective leadership, because it allows leaders to motivate and inspire and collaborate with their teams, and leaders influence their groups through their use of power. So let's look at some different types of power that we have. right? And the first one of these is reward power. So reward power is the influence through incentives, right? So you probably remember when you were a kid, right? If you got an allowance for doing well on your report card or something like that, right? This is reward power, influence through incentives. The pros with this, it motivates your staff, it encourages positive behavior, it improves their morale, but it could also, lead to expectation of constant rewards. People just start doing things just because they expect to get a reward, and then they get upset when they don't get one, or it may create resentment among the staff if incentives aren't distributed fairly, at least in their opinion. If they feel they're not getting equal treatment as someone else, then that could cause a problem. Yeah, and an example of this, like a hospital administrator offering like performance bonuses for nurses that improve patient satisfaction scores, like getting that engagement up and everything like that. While it does seem to get the engagement up because they have that reward coming, I should say. It could potentially just foster competition rather than teamwork, and then people could be doing it just because they want the reward as opposed to it being the right thing for their patients. So again, pros and cons to it. All right, the second is punishment. A punishment is the opposite, obviously, of the reward, right? Control through consequences. You do something wrong, you're going to be punished for it. It enforces standards. It deters negative behavior, right? Because people are afraid to do it. It maintains that discipline. Obviously, the cons, it can create fear and resentment, which obviously may lower the morale if you're using too much punishment and everything like that. An example of this, like a supervisor that reprimands rather a radiology tech for repeatedly showing up late, which ensures that punctuality, but could potentially harm the trust and the motivation that they have with that subordinate. All right, the next is referent power. Now, this one here is influenced through people admiring and those kind of like personal connections that you have. The pro for this, it builds very strong relationships because people really do revere and people really do like you. So you can build those strong relationships. Usually brings a lot of loyalty with it, and it enhances that team cohesion. At the same time, though, it can be subjective, right? If I'm doing referent power, that could be subjective, not very objective in my decision making. I risk favoritism with this one because of the relationships, and then it might not really translate to authority and difficult decision making, right? Just because people like me doesn't necessarily mean I know how to make the right decisions and everything like that. So referent power, it comes and goes, right? It's got its pros and cons like anything else. Most people like this one. They like some kind of manager or a leader that they like and they respect and everything. It's usually something that's very important to them, but it does have its downsides as well. All right, the next one is expert. With expert, this is someone that has that influence and that leadership and that power through knowledge and skill because they're known, right? Someone that that holds a PhD or someone that holds an MD, right? These people that have these expert level educations or people that have been in the field for a very long time, right? That's a nurse that's just been at the hospital forever that really knows the systems well and knows everything of what to do. That's that kind of person that usually is a very good leader, right? And it really strengthens their credibility to have that expert power. It encourages knowledge sharing, promotes evidence-based practices because of that expert level, that educational level that we assume is there. Cons, of course, can lead to pride or resistance to collaborate. They could think they're above everybody else because they are an expert and they don't need to listen to anyone else, that their word is the truth and everything like that. And then they can depend on continued expertise, right? That dependent on that continued expertise is a problem as well because now we get stuck in a rut. We never learn, we never grow if we just assume that we know everything. So that could have its downsides as well. An example of this one here, a physician that's like renowned for their diagnostic accuracy is really sought after for advice and influencing treatment plans based on specialized knowledge and that kind of stuff. But you could also see how that kind of person would really just not be a good leader if they utilize that in a negative way. Okay, the last one is legitimate power. With legitimate power, this is influence through formal authority that's tied to the position. So someone that holds a specific title that gives them the right, the power to be that leader or that manager. Pro, it establishes clear authority. You know they are that person, right? They're the Michael Scott is the manager of the branch, right? So you know that that's who that is. He's got the title. So this establishes that clear authority. It ensures role-based decision making. So the leader is going to be the one making the decisions or directing things in a certain way because they are legitimately in charge. It keeps order and structure and that hierarchy and everything like that. The problem is it can be rigid, right? If it's someone that has that title, a lot of times it can be difficult to get through to them and everything like that. They're not going to take much input from other people. We risk that kind of authoritarian leadership style that we'll be talking about here in a minute, right? So that's a big part of all of this as well. And an example of this, like a hospital director that implements these like new procedural changes, like leveraging their position to like drive compliance, but potentially they could be overlooking frontline feedback and all that kind of stuff, right? So now that we understand power, I want to go ahead and move on to leadership, right? Because power is like the tool that we use to get people to do things. So how do we end up getting people to do things is the question, and that's our leadership style that we use. So when it comes to leadership, us go ahead and define what leadership is, right? This is the ability to inspire, influence, and guide others toward achieving shared goals, right? So we're going to look briefly at several styles and we're going to compare them to each other and we're going to look and see how these different styles juxtapose, like how they play off of each other, how they can be compared to one another. And then the first one we want to look at is the open hand versus the iron fist, right? This is the democratic style, which encourages collaboration, shared decision making, all that kind of stuff. Pros with this one: values diverse input, boosts team morale, encourages innovation and problem solving, but decision making can be kind of slow, right? If we're giving it out to everybody the chance to make decisions, that could slow things down. So if we're in some kind of high risk, needing an answer kind of situation, the Democratic might not be the best. We can risk conflict of opinions if you got all kinds of different people giving their input, and it really does require strong communication skills for all those reasons. Now that's the democratic, where most people they prefer that one. The autocratic is the opposite, and most people do not care for the autocratic. Right? This is centralized decision making with strict authority. So this allows for quick decisions because it is the autocrat is like the my way or the highway kind of thing, right? So you can make that quick decision as the leader. It ensures compliance with the policies because you're following the writ of the law, and it maintains order in these high stakes kind of quick, fast-moving situations. Cons, obviously, it can discourage autonomy. People feel like they don't have any kind of input, any kind of say in what's going on. It may lead to your staff resenting you if you are too autocratic, and it limits rather staff engagement that we might see as well. So, a democratic example, like a medical team leader that like gathers input from nurses and doctors and technicians before they implement some kind of a new like patient care policy, as compared to like an autocratic example be like a surgeon in an emergency room that's like making those quick unilateral decisions to like stabilize like a critical patient, prioritizing that efficiency over the team input. So you can see how it ebbs and flows, right? Sometimes you want to be more democratic. Sometimes the situation calls for you to be more autocratic. That's that flexibility that we talked about early on in the lecture. All right, next one. Think outside of the box versus think inside of the box. You've got the transformational, where you're inspiring that vision, that creativity, innovation, all those kind of things, and it's really good long-term thinking. The pros to that: encourages creativity and adaptation among your staff, builds strong team morale, focuses on personal and professional growth because you're giving them a chance to express their own personal creativity. Obviously, the cons: you need to have that emotional intelligence. You need to be able to build that trust. And if there's heavy structure in the system that you're working within, that can be very difficult, right? You don't have a lot of that leeway to allow people to express themselves if you're in a very structured environment. The opposite is the transactional. This is based on structure and rewards, and it's very performance driven in its objectives, right? So with this one, we would see a lot of reward power being used in a transactional way. The pros for this one: clear expectations and consistency, provides solid incentives, works well in highly regulated environments, so you know exactly what you're going to get out of a transactional leader. The cons: it can discourage creativity, short term versus long term, meaning they don't really think long term with things. It's more short term. We need to get this done, what's right in front of us, as opposed to thinking more long term. And then the staff tends to get dependent on rewards a lot more. We talked about that with the reward power, right? If you give too many rewards, people start to expect rewards. They start working for the reward as opposed to working for the love of what they're doing. So we need to be careful with that. A transformational example: a chief nursing officer that's like encouraging staff to adopt some kind of new patient-centered care model, like reshaping workplace culture and really improving satisfaction, everything like that. Whereas a transactional will be more of a manager kind of person. They're just managing situations as opposed to leading, where they already know they've got a prescribed way that they're going to approach things. They toe the company line and they work within those structures. They reward within structure and everything like that. So very different transformational versus transactional. Now we've got behind the curtain versus in the spotlight. This is the charismatic leader. This is, front and center, using their presence and their influence, and they're inspirational to everybody. That's the kind of leader they are. They energize, they motivate, they drive excitement around new initiatives. They encourage that bold vision and dynamic change, right? They're out and about, and they are that kind of leading by example kind of individual. And again, we have that referent power with this person. So success can depend on personality. It lacks long-term sustainability, like we saw in our last slide with the transactional. It risks reliance of over-empowerment rather, like where you're becoming the focus as opposed to the mission that's becoming the focus. The opposite of this is the servant style. So focuses on supporting other people and ensuring that the team thrives. Very collectivistic kind of person here. Builds trust, enhances team well-being, prioritizes stability and that individual growth, really strengthens that collaboration. Unfortunately, the cons: decision making can be a little slow with this one. We're looking like probably a democratic leader, using democratic power, I should say. Can struggle in structured environments and really may lack that assertiveness in a crisis because they're more of a behind the scenes kind of helping others kind of person. So charismatic example, a CEO with like this dynamic presence that really rallies staff around some kind of new patient-centered creativity issue. We've got a servant example, a hospital administrator that focuses on like staff well-being, providing mental health resources, and really being supportive in the workplace to help people out, is putting things out there as far as asking for evaluation, asking for comments and suggestions and everything like that. All right, last one is the hands-off versus the hands-tied. You've got the laissez-faire over here, which grants autonomy, trusts employees, has very minimal oversight. Pros for this style: it encourages that creativity because they're pretty much on their own. They're independent thinkers. They have to be because you're not dealing with them much. It really permits experts to really take ownership of their work. So this would be more democratic as well. Cons obviously can lead to just a lack of accountability. Depending on how bad this is one of the worst types of managers or leaders that you can have, is that laissez-faire that kind of just doesn't really do anything, doesn't get involved in much of anything, really struggles in those high risk situations where fast decisions need to be made. They can't really step up too well because they're so used to just letting everyone else do everything for them. And it can be really difficult with inexperienced teams if people don't know. I know for the longest time I had a manager at a place I worked, and it was a new place that I worked, and I would always say, hey, how do I go about doing this? And they would say, well, it's a matter of preference, whichever way you prefer. I'd be like, I don't know either way. I don't know. I don't have a preference. I'm too new. And they just didn't have have the ability to really tell me what I could do and help me out. The other one, the opposite of the laissez-faire, then would be the bureaucratic. Right? This is focused on that hierarchy and that strict adherence to the regulations. This would be tending more towards an autocratic kind of power, ensures consistency, creates structured workflows and clear expectations, and really maintains order and complex organization. So we're looking at another manager here as opposed to a leader. The cons, they can be very rigid, again, slow decision making in dynamic environments. So if things get outside the box, very difficult for them to think about what to do, and it could discourage frontline staff input because they don't really open the gate for people to do things. The hands are very tied as opposed to hands off. So the laissez-faire example, a research team leader that's like letting scientists really pursue independent studies with very minimal insight, just trusting their expertise to really drive the innovation, versus the bureaucratic, hospital compliance officer that's very strictly enforcing protocols to make sure that patient safety and adherence to industry standards and everything like that is being met, right? So we see those juxtapositions, those differences there. So I want to ask yourself just a few questions, right? So what is your leadership style? That's going to be an assignment for you this week. You've got to do that leadership style activity. Ask yourself, what is your leadership style? And when you think about this, it really boils down to a few different kinds of questions, what kind of leader you are. The first is, are you more goal-oriented or are you more about relationships? So when you are wanting to lead a group of people, do you care more about the end goal than you do the relationships that you build with your staff on the way to it? Something to think about. The other is structure versus freedom of choice. Do you want more intense structure so that your staff has to work within that structure? You know what that structure is. Everything is laid out the way that you know it to be, versus that freedom of choice. Do you want for your staff to have the ability to make their own choices and take their expertise and take their strengths and utilize them? On your own versus as a team, which do you prefer? Would you rather do things by yourself, or would you rather get involved with your team? Short-term versus long-term thinking. Are you more of a short-term thinker or a long-term thinker? A lot of that is going to impact what kind of leader you are. If you're investing in the long term, you're going to be very different from someone that is very short-term oriented. And then, do you want to empower your staff, or do you want to direct your staff? Do you want to give them the leash and the rope that they need to make their decisions and do what they need to do? Or do you want to direct them? Do you want to keep them structured, keep them in an environment where you can make those kind of decisions and everything at the end of the day? Because ultimately, you're the one that is in charge, and you're the one that will suffer the consequences for failure. All right, so that's it for this one, right? So email me, brandon.schweitzer@allmancollege.edu if you have any questions. Everybody have a great week.